My name is Frankie Marsh, and the afternoon my family gathered to decide what to do about their failure of a daughter. My brother stood up, put a logo on the screen behind him, and told the room it belonged to a genius none of them would ever be lucky enough to meet. He did not know he was pointing at me. We were in the back office of the flagship Marsh Cycle, an outdoor store on the north side of Chattanooga. The store my father built with his own hands before I was born, the store that was quietly dying. 9 of us around the scarred old work table that used to be where we assembled floor models, back when the place was full of people. My brother Wheeze had called it a family business meeting, which in our family had always meant a meeting about me. I sat at the end nearest the shop floor, close enough to smell the chain grease and rubber I had loved my whole life, wearing a faded flannel and jeans, exactly the disappointment they expected. Frankie, my mother, Gail, said before we even started, still dressing like you sleep in the stockroom. Honestly, my father, Hal, did not look up from his coffee. That, more than anything she said, was the thing that could still cut me at 34 years old. Wheeze ran the meeting the way he ran everything, loud and certain and wrong. He walked us through the numbers, which were terrible. Marsh Cycle had gone from 11 stores to 4 in the 6 years, since Dad handed him the keys. Not because the market was bad, but because Wheeze had spent those years cutting the wrong things and insulting the right people. And then he got to the part he had clearly been saving, the part he thought would fix it all. "Here is our lifeline," he said, and he pulled up a slide, and on the slide was a logo. It was a simple thing, a single unbroken line drawn like a mountain switchback trail, a road folding back on itself as it climbed, and tucked into the bends, one word: switchback. That is my logo. I drew it myself at a kitchen table 8 years ago with a pencil that was mostly gone. Switchback Bicycles, Wheeze announced, is the most wanted brand in the country right now. Every serious writer wants one. Waiting lists, magazine covers, and they are finally looking to add authorized dealers in the Southeast. If Marsh Cycle can land a switchback dealership, we are saved. He tapped the screen with real reverence. Whoever built this brand is a genius. Started in a garage, apparently. Total mystery, keeps a low profile. I have been trying for months to get a meeting with the founder. My contact says the founder might actually be flying into Chattanooga this week. The founder was sitting 11 feet away from him, in a flannel shirt. I want you to hold on to the size of that gap, because the whole story lives inside it. My family had gathered to discuss what a disappointment I was, what small, suitable job they could tuck me into so I would stop embarrassing them. And my brother was on his feet, worshiping a stranger whose entire company had come out of my 2 hands. He called that stranger a genius in the same breath he called me a problem. And I had to decide, right there, whether to keep being the quiet woman at the end of the table or to finally push off and ride. To understand how I ended up holding that secret, you have to understand the one thing I know better than anything else in the world, which turns out to be the only thing worth knowing about being underestimated, too. My father taught it to me when I was 6, on the gravel switchback trail that climbs the ridge behind the original store. He was teaching me to ride a 2-wheeler, and I kept tipping over the second I slowed down, and I was furious and scared and ready to quit. And he crouched in the dirt and told me the truest thing anyone has ever told me. A bicycle, he said, is the most unstable thing in the world when it is standing still, and the steadiest thing in the world the moment it is moving. You will never find your balance sitting there waiting for it. You find your balance by going. Every wobble is just the bike asking you to move forward. I pushed off. I rode. And I have been trying to remember that lesson ever since, because I spent most of my life forgetting it. Growing up a Marsh meant growing up in the shop, and I loved it the way some kids love a sport or a song. I was the one in the back with Ray, our old head mechanic, learning to true a wheel and bleed a brake and braze a cracked frame before I was 12. Ray used to say I had the best hands he had ever trained. Bikes were not a job to me. They were the language I thought in. But in my family, there was a story about who got to lead and who got to help, and it was decided before I could talk. Wheeze was the son. Wheeze would run Marsh Cycle. I was the girl who was good with her hands, which in my father's mouth was not a compliment, it was a ceiling. When I was 22 and full of ideas about how bikes should be built, lighter, tougher, made for real people and real hills instead of showroom shine, I brought a design to my father. He looked at it for about 4 seconds and told me to leave the big thinking to Wheeze and go help a customer. Wheeze laughed. My mother said something about how I should find a nice practical career. So I did the thing I am least proud of in this whole story. I believed them. I stopped pushing off. For years, I stood still at the family table, wobbling, waiting for one of them to reach out and hold me steady, and I got quieter and quieter and told myself that being needed in the background was the same as being loved. It was not. And I have to own that part, because it belongs to me and not to them. I taught those people for 2 decades that I required nothing, and then I resented them for believing me. You cannot make yourself invisible on purpose and then be shocked when no one sees you. The thing that finally got me moving again was a crack. I was 26, still wrenching at Marsh Cycle for a wage that insulted me, and a customer brought in a snapped frame from a big expensive brand, snapped in a place it never should have snapped, and the company would not stand behind it. I stood there holding this broken thing and I thought, I could build better than this in my sleep. And for the first time in years, I heard my father's voice from the switchback trail. You find your balance by going. So I went. I quit. I rented half of a friend's garage and I built bicycles. I brazed the first frames myself at night, the way Ray taught me, and I sold them one at a time to riders who could feel the difference the moment they pushed off. I drew a logo at my kitchen table, a switchback trail folding up a mountain, because that trail was where I first learned that balance is not something you wait for. It is something you do. I called the company Switchback. And I built it exactly the way my father built Marsh Cycle in the beginning, one honest thing at a time. Except I did it where my family could not see, because some tired part of me could not survive them looking at my dream for 4 seconds and telling me to go help a customer. Here is what happened while they were writing me off as the sad daughter in the stockroom. Switchback grew, not because I got lucky, but because the bikes were good and the people who rode them told other people. My partner, Nadia, who I met when she was my first real supplier and who believed in the thing before anyone should have, helped me turn a garage into a real company with a real factory and writers on a waiting list. We put more than 300 people to work. Magazines that had ignored my family's dying stores put my frames on their covers. I kept a low profile the whole way, not out of some grand plan, but because I had learned young that the quietest person in the room gets to keep her ideas. And then Wheeze, God help him, started chasing a switchback dealership as the thing that would save the family stores, never once suspecting the founder shared his last name and his father and the same gravel trail behind the shop. Which brings us back to that back office, and my brother on his feet, calling me a genius he would never meet while calling me a failure to my face. The old Frankie would have said nothing. She would have let him finish, let them slot her into some pity job, and gone home and cried and told herself she was keeping the peace. I felt her rising in me, ready to tip over into that familiar stillness one more time. But I was sitting in the shop that taught me everything, looking at a logo I drew with a dying pencil, and I finally pushed off. Wheeze, I said quietly, you are not going to get a meeting with the founder this week. He barely glanced at me. Frankie, not now. This is important. I know it is, I said. That is why I am telling you. You are not going to get a meeting with the founder of Switchback this week. He looked annoyed, ready to talk over me the way he always did. Because, I said, the founder of Switchback is already here. Something in my voice made the room go still in the particular way a room goes still when the weather changes. We stopped. My mother's hand paused halfway to her coffee. I built it, I said. I drew that logo at my kitchen table 8 years ago. That switchback line is the trail behind the first store, the one where Dad taught me to ride. Switchback is mine. I am the founder you have been trying to get a meeting with for months. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then Wheeze laughed, one sharp, disbelieving bark, because it was easier than the alternative. That is not, he started. You cannot possibly. And then he looked at my face, and he looked at that logo, at the switchback trail he had ridden 1,000 times as a kid, and I watched the laugh die in his throat. Ray, our old mechanic, was standing in the office doorway, and Ray started to smile, because Ray had always known who had the best hands. My father set down his coffee very slowly. Frankie, he said, and his voice was not steady. That trail, he knew that trail. He had crouched in the dirt of it and taught me the only thing he ever really taught me. And I had put it in a logo and built a company on it, and he had been staring at it on a screen calling it a stranger's genius. Now this is the part I need you to hear clearly, because there is a version of this story that is all over the internet, the version where the underestimated daughter secretly buys up the family business, forces her family onto their knees, makes them sign papers, and calls it justice. The revenge story version. And I want to tell you exactly why I did not do that, standing in the wreckage of my brother's face. Because I did not build Switchback to win an argument with these people. I built it because I loved bikes, and I love them still, and this dusty, dying shop was where that love was born. Ray taught me to true a wheel in that back room. My father taught me to ride on that ridge. Whatever these people had done to me, Marsh Cycle was not just theirs. It was mine too. And there were 40 employees across those 4 stores whose livelihoods had nothing to do with my brother's ego. People like Ray who had turned wrenches there for 30 years. You have been chasing a Switchback dealership to save these stores, I said to Wheeze. So let us talk about that. Honestly. Not as family, as business. We swallowed. Frankie, if you would just, as your brother, give us the dealership, we are family, this saves everything. And there it was, the same reach for the free ride he had taken his whole life. No, I said, not because you are my brother. That is exactly the thinking that put 11 stores down to 4. I am not going to hand Switchback to Marsh Cycle as a family favor, because a favor is just another way of telling you that you do not have to be good. I looked around the table at all of them, but I am not going to withhold it out of spite either, because there are 40 people who work here who never once made me feel small, and one of them taught me everything I know. I turned to Nadia's number in my phone. Here is what I will do. Switchback will evaluate Marsh Cycle for a dealership the same way we evaluate every dealer. On merit. Your operations, your service department, your people. If you earn it, you get it, and it saves these stores, and I will be glad. If you do not, you do not, and no amount of blood changes that. You want to be treated like a real business. Fine, starting now you are. We stared at me, and if we do not measure up, then you have some work to do, I said. The good news is I know this business better than anyone in this room, and I am willing to tell you exactly what is broken. The bad news is you are going to have to actually fix it, with your hands, not your birthright. My father spoke then, and his voice cracked in a way I had never heard. All those years, he said. You brought me that design when you were 22. I told you to go help a customer. I looked at it for 4 seconds. He put his face in his hands. I have been staring at that same design on a screen all afternoon, calling it the work of a genius. I could have twisted that knife. The whole internet would have cheered if I had. Instead, I told him the truth, which was harder and better. You were wrong that day, I said. It cost us both a lot of years. But I did not build Switchback to make you sorry. I built it because you taught me on that trail that you find your balance by moving forward, and I finally believed you. That lesson was real even when you forgot you gave it to me. He looked up at me with wet eyes, and he did not say anything, because some things have to be felt all the way to the bottom before a person can climb back out, and I let him feel it. I did not force anyone to sign anything. I did not put my mother on a waiting list or my aunt under a non-disclosure agreement or my brother out on the street. That is not balance. That is just falling over in a more expensive direction. What followed over the next months was not a war. That is the part the revenge stories always get wrong. It was slower and quieter and much harder than revenge because it asked something of everyone, including me. My mother called the next morning, warm as sunshine, already telling her friends about her brilliant daughter, and I stopped her gently. Mom, I said, If you are only proud of me now that there is a magazine cover, then you have not actually met me yet. I would like you to. But it starts with you admitting you never bothered before. She was quiet a long time. Then she said, I do not know how to do that. And I said, that is at least honest, so let us start there. And we did slowly on level ground, which is the only ground worth building on. Weez was the one who surprised me, because Weez had the most to lose and lost it the hardest. Switchback's dealer team evaluated Marsh cycle, and Nadia was blunt with him, and the report was brutal and fair. His service department was gutted. He had run off the best mechanics to save money. His stores felt like they were embarrassed to sell bikes. He could have raged. Instead, about a week after the meeting, he showed up at my factory, and he found me on the floor with a torch in my hand, brazing a frame the way I still do when I need to think. And he stood there watching for a while, and then he said, I do not know how to do what you do. I never learned. I just inherited the title, and assumed the knowing would come with it. It does not, I told him. Nobody hands you balance, you have to move to find it. He asked if I would teach him, not give him the dealership, teach him the business. And that was the first thing my brother had said to me in 20 years that did not have contempt folded inside it, so I said yes, slowly, on level ground. He earned it. That is the part I am proudest of, more than any magazine cover. We spent the next half year rebuilding Marsh Cycle's service department from the studs. He hired back 2 of the mechanics he had run off. He got on the floor and actually learned to fix the bikes he was selling, badly at first, and he laughed at himself about it, which was new. He stopped talking about the family legacy and started talking about the customers. And when Switchback finally granted Marsh Cycle a dealership, it was not a gift, and everyone in that shop knew it. He had earned it on merit, the same as any dealer in the country, and it meant something to him precisely because I had refused to just hand it over. The stores stopped dying. Ray got a raise and an apprentice. 40 people kept their jobs, and a few dozen more got hired. I forgave my family. I want to be clear that I did, because forgiveness is not the same as pretending it never happened. I forgave them, and I did not hand them back the key to the part of me they had spent 30 years bruising. Weez is my brother again, an actual brother now, a humbler and better one. But he is a dealer who earned my respect, not a boy I owe my dreams to, and he knows the difference, and honestly he seems relieved by it. My father comes to the factory sometimes just to watch the frames get built, and once he stood at my shoulder while I brazed and said, quietly, you have the best hands I have ever seen, and 30 years too late is still not never, so I let him have it, and I let myself have it too. I kept the very first frame I ever built, the ugly one from the garage, hanging on the wall of my office, not to remind me of where I came from, to remind me of the moment I stopped waiting to be held up and pushed off instead. Because here is the thing that gravel trail taught me, the thing that turned out to be about so much more than bicycles. You do not find your balance and then move. You find your balance by moving. I spent years sitting still at that family table, wobbling, tipping over, waiting for someone to reach out and steady me. And it never came, because it was never going to come, because that is not where balance lives. Balance came the second I quit waiting and rode. Every wobble in those years was just my life asking me to move forward, and I kept mistaking it for a reason to sit still. If you are reading this, and you have spent your life waiting for the people who were supposed to hold you up to finally see you steady, I want to tell you the one true thing I know. You will not find your footing sitting at their table. You find it by going. So tell me, down below, what is the thing you have been too afraid to push off on? The design you brought to the table once and got told to go help a customer. Because I promise you the balance you are waiting for is on the other side of moving, and it was always your ride to take.